sometimes it is about combining different assessment methods you've observed, but that observation in itself does not demonstrate that the learner understands why they do it. And there's only one way you're going to find out if a learner understands the process that they're actually performing in front of you, and that is to ask them. So sometimes you do have to, or you will, combine an observation with some questions at the end to get a full understanding that the learner can do it, but also they understand why they do it and the consequences if they don't do it that way. And don't forget those beginning pages of the workbook, that right at the beginning, that chapter. Get the employer in front of you and show him those pages, show her those pages, so that whoever's going to be supporting the learner, so that they can see there's a point of reference that they can go to. Because quite often they don't get involved because they don't understand the process. It's all a bit of a mystery to them. This workbook hopefully will get rid of that so that you can involve them and they can talk to the learner after you've gone, because they've got the workbook as a point of reference where they can work together. Where we are today is that quite often an assessor will ask learner questions and then the learner will answer those questions. It's all verbal and it's digitally recorded. Who does that? Anyone in the room? Do they use digital recordings? Professional discussions, question and answer. If the learner produces a document and you say, can you explain that document to me? Do you record what they're saying? Absolutely. So these workbooks can be used in exactly the same way. So if there's a question here, why would you get the learner to suddenly write it if you wouldn't normally ask the learner to write it? Okay. So you could ask the question verbally and get the learner to give you the answer verbally. Okay. And if you're going to submit the workbook, then just write in there, see recording and give it a reference. What's important, there's an audit trail to find what you've done and where you've done it. There are professional discussions in here. What's good about the professional discussions is that there are bullet points so that the learner knows what you're going to talk to them about. Okay, and part of the preparation might be, you're the assessor, you might say to them, this is the professional discussion, you can see some bullet points here. This is the professional discussion, and I'm going to cover, and then you just mark and highlight exactly what you're going to talk about in the professional discussion. Then it gives the learner a clear guidance on what they need to go away and research or find out about before the professional discussion takes place. If you've already seen it, you do not then need to go on and do a professional discussion. The assessor is still making the judgment whether there's enough evidence or not. Okay, whether it's sufficient or not. This is a tool, and this is a tool giving you different options at times. Okay, it might be that you can't observe a learner do something. It might be, if we're talking about a customer complaint, or something that, if you talk about the emergency services, there might be something that happens when you're not there to observe it. So professional discussion is what you would use, and ask the learner to talk you through a situation when they had to deal with something. You would want your learners to know, particularly once level 2, maybe you do a lot of spoon feeding, but after that, level 3, you would expect a level 3 learner to take some ownership and responsibility for their learning. How can they do that if they don't know what the specifications are? This is an assessment tool. This is not a replacement for the specifications. Absolutely. And the other thing, while we're talking about that, is I would expect an assessor to be carrying their specifications. If you look at the different tasks within the workbook, you will see that it's coded. It says BTEC here, the page I've opened, and it says which units is covered. It's not the activity that's mapped to the standards, it's the answer that the learner gives. Can you see the subtle difference? They are referenced, but if I'm assessing this, I would need to go to my specifications to see what unit 68 2.1 is. Because the learner could put anything down here, and they might have even answered the question. But what's important is, does it meet the actual assessment criteria? Okay. What's important is the assessor knows what's coming up in these workbooks. So it's no good receiving a workbook and say, there you go, learner, enjoy. And it's important that you know what is in the workbook and that you've actually highlighted what you intend to use and what you're not going to use within the workbooks. And you can actually make that specific for the individual learners. The planning of using these workbooks is absolutely key to success. I think I've also emphasised that the fact that you use as much of the workbooks as you need to in terms of getting the qualification and ensuring the learner's met all the assessment criteria and the learning outcomes. It's not about, MVQ was very much, you start at the beginning, you end at the end. QCF is far more broader, okay, it's wider. So it's about, has the learner met the learning outcomes, the assessment criteria? Has the assessor assessed appropriately? If the answer is yes, then it's met, the qualification is met. So you don't start at the beginning of the book and end at the end. You dip into it where you need to ensure that you've met the assessment criteria.